With Project Zero, Maiden of Blackwater, and Project Zero, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, both coming out on PC recently, I had the chance to dive into my favorite horror series. Now you might know the series as Project Zero or Fatal Frame depending on the region you live in. But the original Project Zero was released in 2001 and was actually my first horror game. And I ended up playing Project Zero 2 and 3 on my PlayStation 2. And those two hold a special place as probably one of my favorite horror games of all time, as I was both utterly terrified by the atmosphere of the games and enthralled by their story. Mask of the Lunar Eclipse and Maiden of Blackwater I never had a chance to play because they came out on the Wii, which was simply a console I didn't have access to at the time. And now, with the re-released titles on PC, I got the chance to go in absolutely blind to experience new games of my childhood horror series. I started with Maiden of Blackwater, which came out first on Steam, but was actually the last Project Zero game to be ever released. And while the rituals and dark storylines were there was something missing. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something wasn't quite working for me. For a time I thought it was simply I had grown up, I had played a lot of horror games, and that was the reason I wasn't getting the same feeling as I had before. And I believe that until I played Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, when I suddenly understood what issue I'd been having. And it wasn't something I expected, because it was the map. Now, Project Zero are psychological horror games that rely on the building of dread and unease in the player. There are some jump scares and there is some combat. The combat is actually quite unique, as you utilize the camera to fight the ghost. And while it is unique, it is also not the series' strong point. The best way to describe it is clunky, but it works. And the setup is always the same. You are a girl in a mysterious place where an old, often kinda gruesome ritual took place. Something went wrong at some point and now the place is abandoned and haunted. And you are there for some reason. The reason differs between the game. And the main gameplay is gathering up information about the things that happen there, while dealing with occasional ghosts and jump scares and unlocking new areas, slowly expanding your map as you get to know your surroundings. Places become familiar to you, and to this day I remember the layout of many of the older games. I can navigate them easily in my mind because I have walked through them so many times, and not just because of repeated playthroughs, but because you are constantly backtracking and revisiting old areas in the game. You are able to go to previously explored areas to gather up notes, find secrets, or continue the story. You always have the freedom to return to places you've been before, and your mental map of the area makes the place feel more realistic and connected, and at times more terrifying. I definitely have places in the older games where I always get nervous when I have to travel through them, because I connect them to certain figures or enemies that tend to show up there. And then I played the Maiden of Blackwater, which was clearly strongly inspired by Project Zero 3. In that game, the game is split into two main areas. First, the Dream Manor, where your character goes as they fall asleep. This is the main gameplay area. The manor you are exploring and expanding. This is where the ritual happened, and this is where you're fighting the ghosts. And then, the home of your character, where they are during their waking hours. A safe haven that slowly gets more and more haunted as the game goes on, robbing you of your only place of safety. And I absolutely adored this design. And when I realized that Maiden of Blackwater had a similar setup, I was so excited. Because like Project Zero 3, Maiden of Blackwater is split into two main areas. The coffee shop, which serves as your safe house, and with time gets more and more haunted, and the mountain. And it is on the mountain where things don't quite work out for me. You see, your character travels from the coffee shop and to the mountain each chapter, and you start the chapter somewhere on the mountain. But these areas feel isolated, and while some of the areas are connected, it's not obvious and doesn't feel natural. So while the connections are there, and occasionally the game does tell you to travel from one area to the next, it never gains that sense of familiarity. The most familiar building for me was the Doll Shrine, because we go there a few times. And even then, it didn't stick with me. And I cannot tell you from memory how to connect the doll shrine to the inn or the tram station to the top of the mountain. The game never felt like one expanding area. It felt like individual levels, which can work really well in some horror games, but just not in this one. I just felt that each time I was being plopped somewhere, I would explore some spooks and then I would go back to the coffee shop. I didn't feel like the areas were connected, turning the exploration of a disturbing place into individual challenges, which made it hard for me to mentally connect things that happened at the top of the mountain to the things happening in the inn at the bottom of the mountain. It just didn't work for me at all. Now, this isn't the first time they have used this large of an area. Project Zero 2 did happen in a small town. You will travel to different houses throughout the game. And yet the connection between the houses, you physically walking between them, really helped with keeping you mentally in the town. And perhaps part of this was the people of Blackwater were leaving the mountain voluntarily. So it always felt like they could simply choose to go. While in every other version, the people are stuck there. In Project Zero 1, Nico is searching for her brother, so she obviously won't leave. In Project Zero 2, the twin sisters are stuck in a mysterious town. In Project Zero 3, you go to the Dream Manor every time you fall asleep, and you can't really not fall asleep forever. And in Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, which is the latest one I played, you are on this island to find your friends and what happened to you all those years ago. And while yes, sometimes characters wander up to the mountain and you are going as somebody else to save them, there were times where you had everybody and I felt like you should really just try to go with them, or at least when they go missing, call the police and have them help you search for them. But I noticed how much I missed the map when I started playing Mask of the Lunar Eclipse. There are 3 main characters, and I quickly noticed 2 of them were in the same house, while the third seemed to be somewhere else. But it didn't take me too long to realize that these houses were in fact connected, and as the game progressed, I would open up the way between the houses, expanding what was not a manor this time, but an institution. And like in the first 3 games, I quickly got familiar with the building. I memorized pathways and layouts as I played through it. And while the ritual and the story is far less disturbing than the one of Maiden of Blackwater, I realized that what I had been missing was the slowly expanding map, the constantly pushing deeper into the dark history of place by opening up new and new areas of the manor. And when I look back at my favorite horror games, they all sort of have this feature of making sure you feel stuck somewhere in a place that is ever expanding as you explore. Notable one is Dead Space, where you are stuck on a ship and you are exploring the ship, able to backtrack and go back to previous areas as you figure out what happened there. Silent Hill 2, which is also a favorite of mine, happens in the town of Silent Hill. You are traveling between the houses and areas of the town, adding to the mystery, sort of the feeling of the place you're in. And even if I look at my playthrough of Resident Evil games, my favorite times have always been when I'm stuck in a singular area that I get to get familiar with, like the police station in Resident Evil 2 or Castle Dimitrescu in Resident Evil Village. There is simply something special about becoming familiar with a location and facing the horrors within it. It creates a unique form of tension and uneasiness that is quite special. Or at least that's my opinion. So tell me, do you agree with me or disagree with me? Maybe you think I'm not making any sense at all, or maybe you have experienced this as well. Let's talk about it in the comments and maybe the areas of some of your favorite horror games. What brings tension to you in horror games? Is it the environment? Is it the sound design? Is it the story or the enemies? Or maybe a bit of everything? I would love to hear about it. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I see you next time.